So welcome, everyone. My name is Julia Kim. I'm Vice President of Strategy and Program Innovation at the Council of Graduate Schools, and I'm also PI on the Innovations in Graduate Education Hub. On behalf of the IGE Hub and the ECR Hub, our team is really pleased to be collaborating on this event, creating a STEM identity in graduate school. Our presenters today are Dr. Catherine Mobley, who is Research Professor of Sociology at Clemson University, Dr. Jessica Karch, who is PI at Turk, a research-based nonprofit focused on improving mathematics and STEM education, and Dr. Krishna Pakala, who is Associate Professor and Associate Chair of Mechanical and Biomedical Engineering at Boise State University. Next slide, please. So a bit of practical information before we get started. This event is designed to be very interactive, and we've planned for at least one breakout group to take place in the middle of the event. You are also welcome to use the chat at any time. To help facilitate communication and networking, please make sure that your profile is updated with the name that you would like others to use in the breakout groups. We also ask that you keep your mics muted until we reach the breakout groups. We also want to mention that only the presentation portion of this event will be recorded and shared in IGE and ECR channels, and the breakout groups will not be recorded to encourage you to speak more openly. But please do respect the anonymity of anything that is said in those breakout groups. Share ideas, but please don't attribute them to anyone in that group. Next slide, please. So today's event was designed around several goals, and we recognize that we only have an hour together, and there are limits to what we can accomplish in 1 hour. But we hope that by identifying these goals and shaping the presentations and the discussion around them, you will come away in a better position to do a number of things. So first and foremost, define some key dimensions of STEM identity formation in graduate education, including how professional, research, and personal identities overlap. Second, identify program designs and mentoring practices and learning environments that have been shown by evidence to support healthy STEM identity formation among graduate students. Third, to demonstrate some confidence in adapting at least one evidence-based strategy or practice discussed in the webinar in your own graduate program or research group. And finally, because it is the goal of both the ECR and IGE hubs to facilitate connections among researchers, to develop connections with other project leaders conducting research on STEM education. Next slide. So at this point, my ECR and IGE colleagues are going to say a few words about the two hubs, and then we'll turn it over to presenters. So for those of you who don't know the Innovations in Graduate Education Hub, this is the hub of NSF's IGE program, which is designed to encourage the development and implementation of bold, new, and potentially transformative approaches to STEM graduate education training. Many of our activities support learning across IGE grantees, but in line with the goal of accelerating innovation in graduate education, we deliberately invite other STEM researchers into this work. So you're welcome to visit our website to learn more about IGE projects, to subscribe to our newsletter, which you can do at the QR code there, join our LinkedIn group, or view what we call our IGE Idea Labs, which are curated on the IGE website. So please visit igehub.org to learn more, and we will be rolling out new programming this spring, and we hope that you can join us. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, David Miller, who is PI of the ECR Hub. David?
Thanks so much, Julia. All right, so I'm David Miller. I am senior researcher at the American Institutes for Research and PI of the ECR Hub, which has some analogous functions to IGE, but instead of supporting the IGE programs for the EDU Core Research program. It supports fundamental education research and capacity building projects. And so one contrast between IGE, which has a more applied focus, ECR also supports more fundamental research. So, for instance, in the context of today's event, you might be interested in how students' identity develops during the course of graduate school or varies by department. Um, and that might not involve at first an intervention, but could lay the foundation for future such research. ECR would be the prime home for that kind of foundational, fundamental research that could contribute insights into later development and testing of intervention approaches. There's two solicitations, ECR Core and ECR Bixer, Bixer standing for Building Capacity in STEM Education Research. But just as of December, that second solicitation was archived. So just noting that if you're have been aware and wondering about that. But ECR remains active, welcomes proposals on graduate education among other grade levels, and has its next deadline in October. And so I'll drop the link into, oh, we already have the link in the chat to the ECR Hub, and there you can subscribe to the newsletter as well. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to Dr. Catherine Mobley to help give us a shared understanding for the content of today's event.
Thank you. Again, I'm Catherine Mobley from Clemson University. I'm delighted to be a part of this session. And to begin the workshop today, I want to offer a shared way of thinking about science identity. And so at its core, science identity reflects how people see themselves and how they're seen by others as participants in scientific work. So it's not a single dimension, but rather it develops at the intersection of multiple identities as students, researchers, professionals, and members of disciplinary communities. And also it's shaped by individual experiences and broader structural and cultural forces such as socio-demographic factors, classroom and work experiences, and sense of belonging. And there are numerous theoretical frameworks that can help us understand these processes, such as those that are listed on the slide. And I imagine that all of you may use different theoretical frameworks for your own research on science identity. But they each emphasize something different, but I think they converge around a shared idea that science identity isn't fixed, it's cultivated. And while every discipline may shape it differently, it's likely that we also share similarities. So as you hear the three presentations that follow, I invite you to notice both the differences and similarities across our disciplinary spaces and think about what resonates with your own research and whether what you learned today sparks new ideas on the concept, perhaps for a future grant proposal, such as those that David described. And so now I'll shift into the first of our three research presentations. So if I can be allowed to share my slides. And let's see. There we go. Can everybody see that? Thumbs up? Great. So I'm sharing insights briefly from our NSF funded project, which examines how students and professionals in the social sciences, in particular sociology, develop their science and professional identities. So this project sits at the intersection of discipline, identity, and scientific practice, and it's one of the first to look systematically at science identity formation in a social science field. So support from ECR program has given us the space to explore these questions in depth and to develop new theoretical insights. So as indicated in the slide, our project addresses several core questions. Why do people choose sociology as a major in a career? How do they describe their identities as they move through programs and into work? And what helps or gets in the way of professional identity formation and science identity formation? And we also examined how social identities intersect with these pathways. And we explored the structural contextual factors, including differential access to opportunities that influence entry and retention in the field. So our mixed method qualitative approach, it was entirely a qualitative study, was designed to elicit deep narratives from the participants. We conducted 122 in-depth interviews with 50 sociology undergrads, 50 sociology graduate students, 22 practicing professionals, and we also interviewed 19 leaders in the discipline for a total of 141 interviews. Before each interview, participants completed a short survey about their socio-demographics, why they chose the major, about their career goals, a survey about science capital and science identity, and their sense of belonging to the field. So we used this information during the actual interview, where we asked about educational and professional experiences, and also used a identity mapping tool, what we call the identity circle, to help participants visualize how they see themselves as students, professionals, and scientists. And so I used the similar tools and surveys in my prior work on engineering education and look forward to doing some comparative analysis in the future. So for our theoretical lens, analytically, we used an abductive approach, moving iteratively between the theory and the data to refine our emerging interpretations and move closer to foundational theory development in this new area of research. So we drew on the competence performance recognition framework developed by Heidi Carlone and Angela Johnson in their research on Black women in engineering. So competence refers to that internal sense that I know the science, I understand the concepts, theories, and methods of my discipline. For sociology students, competence often shows up as them realizing that sociology is more than common sense. It's an empirical social science that involves theory, evidence, and research design. Performance is putting that competence into action, designing studies, collecting data, building surveys, etc. And recognition involves a tipping point, really, asking questions whether students see whether other people see students as scientists and whether they see them as contributors to the scientific enterprise. So just real briefly, as I'm running short on time, illustrative quotes for each from our study. Here, many competence students talked about moments where something clicked, where they realized their knowledge and skills were solid. So in this quote, a student describes their formative research experience as solidifying their competence. So that was a pivotal moment for them that gave them confidence and put that knowledge into action, performance. So they talked about constructing surveys, running analyses, learning new research methods, professors making a conscientious effort to give them that experience. And I think this helped students to see themselves as people who do science rather than just people who take science courses for some sort of gen ed requirement. And then there's recognition, which emerged as the most powerful and sometimes fragile elements of this model. One student recalled a faculty member saying, "You're all sociologists, you're scientists." And that single statement shifted how they understood themselves. So it wasn't just about being capable and competent. It wasn't about performing or a skill or a grade. It was about being seen and named as someone who belonged. Students also, pretty much across the board, encountered skepticism from peers, family, and sometimes institutions about whether sociology counts as a science. So this student was studying with their STEM peers in the library, and they were amazed that she was actually taking a statistics class in sociology. So across all the interviews, competence, performance, and recognition were intertwined, but recognition was the catalyst that made the other two components solidified and possible. So lastly, real briefly, I'm developing a conceptual framework, kind of theoretical framework that I call emergent science identity. And basically that reflects that in our data, science identity appeared as nascent, early in its formation, fragile, easily strengthened or disrupted, contested, contextual, influenced by classrooms, mentoring, institutional cues, It shifted and evolved as students gained experience. And another way to think about the word emergent is that it was urgent, particularly for students navigating complex pathways. So these six terms reflect how science identity forms in sociology, and is something that is not fixed or assumed, but it's continually developing. So on the left, students talked about many different terms when thinking about science: STEM scientist, researcher, sociologist, social scientist. And they engaged in self-recognition and meaning making, this constant shift in their identity as they came up against forces that challenged their notion that they were scientists. So on the right side, in other words, students described several structural and cultural influences: mentors, access to resources, ambivalent science-related identities, marginalization, even in the discipline of sociology, and contested recognition. So these forces sent uneven messages about belonging and legitimacy. So bringing these together, the identities that students inhabit on the left, and then the structural symbolic influences on the right, explains why science identity in sociology is emergent rather than settled and solid. So even if students were doing exceptional work, their identities often developed under conditions of ambiguity, uneven recognition, and disciplinary understanding. And so I'm curious and look forward to learning from you all about whether you see similar dynamics emerging in your own disciplines. So I'm going to stop here and turn it over to Jessica, who will describe her research on science identity.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. If I can find, I think that this presentation, are the slides up?
Yeah.
Great. I think this presentation actually is really interesting in dialogue with Dr. Mobley's presentation. I'll be talking about our work on our Big Sur IID program, looking at interdisciplinary graduate training programs. And so this is timely because in the last 25 years or so, there's been a huge investment in interdisciplinary STEM graduate training as we've started to recognize that these grand challenges of the 21st century, combating climate change, developing solutions for rapidly developing technology, are challenges we cannot address with single disciplines alone. When we look at the different approaches that are used for bringing multiple disciplines together, there's three main approaches that you might see in the literature. A multidisciplinary approach, where collaborators from different disciplines work independently or on different aspects of a project. A transdisciplinary approach, where members of different disciplines use a shared conceptual framework. This often entails collaboration between scientists and stakeholders, and they work beyond and across their respective disciplines in a problem-centric way. And an interdisciplinary approach, where the various cognitive and social structures of disciplines are synthesized and integrated to create something new. For example, a new conceptual model, a new methodology, or even a new interdiscipline like biophysics or environmental science. I want to name all three of these because in practice, these are often very conceptually fuzzy. Interdisciplinary identity, as it's developed in graduate school, is often challenging. Burke and Larson call engaging in interdisciplinary training an identity challenge. And there's many reasons for this. In interdisciplinary training, students often experience challenges to their competences and expertise, being asked to take classes in domains that they may not be familiar with, use techniques that they're not trained in, and develop competences that are distinct from those that they developed in their disciplinary training, such as certain kinds of collaboration and communication skills. There's also often structural challenges. So Many interdisciplinary training opportunities are fellowships, and the students who are enrolled and being trained through these are still graduate students in disciplinary departments. And so there are often tensions in expectations between the interdisciplinary training and what's required for them to complete their degree. There's also interdisciplinary training also intersects with social identity. That influences students' orientation towards interdisciplinarity, as well as the impact that interdisciplinarity has on their career. There's a wide body of literature that's shown that there's a penalty to being an interdisciplinary researcher. And what we're really interested in our research is how these different dynamics potentially engage new perspectives and new trainees in science who have historically not been included in scientific training and potentially expand ideas of what science can do. I'm going to refer to both of these ideas as broadly social impact. And so we have two research questions. The first research question is, how is the connection between interdisciplinarity and social impact currently conceptualized in the research literature on STEM graduate training? And how do supports or challenges for interdisciplinarity provide leverage or further obstacles for social impact in interdisciplinary graduate training programs, policies, and structures? And again, when I say social impact, we think about it from two lenses. Imagine this green oval is a representation of a graduate training program. We're thinking about it as the impacts on trainees. For example, how do you broaden participation in an interdisciplinary program beyond the students who you would typically anticipate? For example, if it's an environmental science program, how are you inviting students from sociology and engaging those in ways that they're being trained in with similar rigor to the students in your environmental science or chemistry program who the faculty may be more familiar with? What are the structures being put in place? And the second is this outward impact, the impact on society. As we bring in different perspectives from an interdisciplinary approach, how are we conceptualizing what is the impact that research is having on the world beyond just the academic outcomes? We're a little bit less far along in our research, so I'll talk about our methods and some of our very preliminary findings. First, for research question one, we're approaching this using a qualitative metasynthesis. Our methods are adapted from Ong and collaborators' Institute of Metasynthesis guide. A metasynthesis is a type of systematic literature review where you examine the findings of qualitative studies through an interpretive process to develop an enhanced understanding of a specific topic. And we have two synthesis questions related to these two dimensions of social impact I named. And I'm happy to talk more about our systematic search process in the breakouts, but we're currently at the stage of finalizing our start set, and we're really excited to get started with analysis. We're going to take a discourse analysis approach. Some very preliminary findings. So my incredible research associate, Christina Silva, who's on the call, did a mini review from papers in our start set for an ICLS presentation we'll be giving in June about how our STEM graduate students train to be transdisciplinary as to collaborate with stakeholders to address socioscientific issues. One of the major findings from this mini review that we thought was really interesting was that across this small set of 6 papers, attitudes toward the role of stakeholders shifted through engaging in interdisciplinary coursework and immersive learning experiences, and that these interdisciplinary experiences challenged students' perception that objective scientific knowledge was more valuable than other forms of knowledge. So we're excited to really dig into this a little bit more over the next couple of months as we continue this line of research. My second research question is looking at a policy analysis of currently funded interdisciplinary graduate programs, which we are about to start recruiting for. We had some preliminary conversations with potential participants in the fall. So if anyone on this call is a PI of a federally funded NRT or IGE graduate program with a focus on inter or transdisciplinary training, please consider completing our screening survey to participate in our policy analysis. Christina will put the link in the chat. And so thank you to our amazing, very small but amazing research team, our advisory board, and NSF for funding this. And thank you so much for inviting us to share today. I will pass the presentation on.
All good? All right. So we learned a little bit about theory and we learned about some of the practical approaches. Now we are going to learn more about what it looks like giving voice to all of this, especially to our STEM graduate students. So I'll share more about the NSF IGE project that we have around storytelling and how it can strengthen STEM graduate students' identity, belonging, and confidence. So as we talked about earlier, this is the core essence of this webinar. And our work is grounded in self-determination theory, which says that motivation depends on three basic human needs. One is autonomy, which is who am I becoming? Relatedness, do I belong? And the third one is competence, am I capable? In graduate STEM education, these directly map to professional identity, sense of belonging, and imposter phenomenon. So many students struggle not because they lack ability, they struggle because they question whether they belong. Our intervention, especially the storytelling, targets those needs directly through a structured format. So our project has 4 objectives. Which is to develop a storytelling curriculum with our amazing national nonprofit, the Story Collider. We then implement it with STEM graduate students and then measure shifts in identity, belonging, and imposterism. And then, as with many of our work, we ensure that this is disseminated widely so that people like you all can apply it. And we have the curriculum, which is essentially very simple, but very intentional. Students learn that stories are about believable characters experiencing meaningful events who must cope with the outcomes. So all our students then reflects on moments of discovery, doubt, or not fitting in. They build scenes. They identify what was at stake. They map a narrative arc. They understand what changed during their story. They draft and revise, record, and sometimes perform their story. This is scaffolded narrative identity work. And our research asks, what do STEM identity narratives look like? Do they shift identity and belonging? And which narrative features matter? And like any scientific study, we need to have hypotheses. So we hypothesize that storytelling has strong STEM identity and researcher identity implications. It can help reduce imposter phenomenon and increase retention and stereotype reduction. The mechanism here is that narrative meaning making. So when students reflect on those critical turning points and publicly articulate growth, they then internalize that identity. And then these public performances reinforce that shift that happens because of cognitive consistency. When you say something in public that you believe in, you start to believe that is true. And then storytelling becomes both reflective and performative identity work. In terms of how we are doing this, this is a 3-year, 2-institution implementation. At Boise State, we ran 2 retreats per year with STEM graduate students. And in year 3, which we are in right now, we expanded it to Utah State. Each cohort includes an intensive full-day workshop, story drafting and revision assignment that we ask our students to do, a $250 stipend for the incredible amount of time they're investing in this, and then a live performance event. So we believe that this cohort model matters, who we call them as story fellows, because identity work is clearly amplified when these students are working collectively. And in terms of methods, we use a mixed methods analysis. Quantitatively, we measure professional identity, sense of belonging, and imposter phenomenon, both pre and post. And qualitatively, we use the written narratives by the students, the interviews that our research team does with them, and the eventual narrative structure and emotional arcs become part of all of our analysis. We also, as a pilot, do measure audience effects at our live shows so that we can see how public storytelling shifts perception of who belongs to STEM. We examine, as you can see, the impact not only at the storyteller level individually, but on the cohort, and then most importantly, on the community levels. The assignment. So each fellow writes a 8 to 1200 word true person story about their discovery or doubt or belonging. They then submit written and recorded versions and receive feedback. And most importantly, we encourage our students to talk about scars, not wounds, something which are processed experiences. And what truly happens after all of this is very powerful. When students hear each other's stories, they realize I'm not the only one. That realization alone shifts belonging. Now on to results. Across 2 years, we see consistent gains in STEM identity and also researcher identity. And imposter scores also show small but consistent reductions. And what matters most for us as a team is the patterns that we are noticing. Students are clearly shifting how they see themselves. Qualitatively, they move from I study science to I am a scientist. And as we all agree, that shift matters, and that's why we are doing all of this work. In terms of the qualitative work that we have done, to understand how these shifts occur, we analyze the stories themselves. We map emotional arcs, those rises and falls in emotional intensity, and then also understand the inflection points which signal like critical incidents that happen, which are actually the moments of identity change. So those two items are analyzed. We also, across narratives, we see several patterns. We saw overcoming hardships, career or cultural negotiation, and then international transition. Most stories also follow, redemptive arcs, which helps with meaning making mechanism. So it helps for them to overcome doubt, which then becomes a growth opportunity. So through reflection, struggle is reinterpreted by our student as a part of becoming, not evidence of not belonging. And the vulnerability within these community builds their belonging as well. And then we see that the identity change is narratively constructed. So storytelling, as you can see in a quick 7-minute presentation, clearly offers a scalable, most importantly, human-centered intervention for graduate education. And by addressing the identity, belonging, and competence, we strengthen not just persistence, but professional formation. I really appreciate NSF support for this, and then the amazing team that I get to work every day on this cool project. Thank you all.
So thank you so much to our presenters. We are going to move to breakout groups at this point, and you will be invited in a moment to join a breakout group. All you need to do is hit confirm, and you will be automatically added to a breakout group for some discussion questions that I want to note will be the same across all the breakout groups. So it's not